Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Social Change Dialogue, Sharing Our Stories, a discussion with authors who started their journeys as student parents. I'm Layli Mapayan, Executive Director of the Wellesley Centers for Women, and I'd like to thank you all for tuning in for this discussion. Our program will begin with a moderated discussion panel, followed by a Q&A session where we will take questions from the audience. A few housekeeping matters related to this webinar that everyone should be aware of. First, to keep things running smoothly, we will disable the chat. We ask that you send all of your questions using the Q&A feature that you should see at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the program, and that's where you can enter any questions that you have for our panelists. Second, we are recording this program, and the video will be posted on our website for folks who are not able to join us this afternoon. For those of you who are not familiar with the Wellesley Centers for Women, WCW is a research and action institute at Wellesley College. Our mission is to advance gender equality, social justice, and human well-being through high-quality research, theory, and action programs. For 45 years, we've been focusing on shaping a better world for women and girls, families and communities in all their diversity here and around the world. Mental health and adolescent development are two key areas of our work, and they've never been more important. More than 1 in 5 undergraduates in the United States today are parents, and more than half of them are single mothers. Yet, parenting students can feel largely invisible on college campuses. They often have to fight to access the resources and support they need, and parenting students of different backgrounds with regard to race, gender, immigration status, class, and the like may experience further obstacles to obtaining their degree. This panel will feature 3 student parents who graduated from colleges across the country, became scholars, experts, and advocates, and went on to author books about their experiences to help today's parenting students, as well as tomorrow's. During the program, panelists will discuss their personal experiences as parenting students and share insights from their books. They will also reflect on the ways that identity impacts the student parent experience and offer advice to current and prospective parenting students. This panel is of particular interest to me as someone who was a student parent. I had my first child as a junior in college and my second one, my first semester of graduate school. During a portion of that time, I was also a single parent. As a result of my experiences, it has always been important to me to support student parents as they pursue their education against the backdrop of many kinds of obstacles, as well as to elevate awareness about student parent issues, concerns, and needs in the wider population, as well as within higher education institutions. There's a need for policies and funding to support student parents, and student parents themselves need champions. Even though times have changed somewhat since I was a student parent, we still have a long way to go. That's why I'm especially excited to introduce and hear from today's guests. So let me now introduce you to the panelists who will be sharing their expertise with us today. Diana Blake is a mother of 4, an author, speaker, and instructor who has worked with parenting students across the country. She published her first book, College Success for Moms, in 2016, and will be releasing a new book, Be a Champion: How to Support Parenting Students in and Out of the Classroom, in 2023. Until July of 2021, Diana lived in California, where she was an academic advisor and part-time instructor. Today, Diana resides in Iowa with her husband, children, and mother, where she teaches composition and literature at Iowa Western Community College. Dr. Autumn Green is an applied sociologist and nationally recognized scholar in higher education and anti-poverty programs. She's a research scientist at the Wellesley Centers for Women, where she leads the Higher Education Access for Parenting Students Research Initiative. Her research and advocacy focus on college access and success for low-income, first-generation, and non-traditional students, especially parenting students. At WCW, Autumn is developing a series of resource guides for prospective college students with kids and dependents. Autumn earned her master's and doctoral degrees in sociology at Boston College and holds a master's of education in community arts and education from Lesley University. Her work has been funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and the U.S. Department of Education. She's discussed student-parent issues in media outlets, including Ms. Magazine, WBUR, and the Hechinger Report. Today, she will discuss her forthcoming manuscript, co-authored with Amanda Freeman of the University of Hartford, Surviving, Striving, and Thriving Low-Income Mothers in Higher Education. Nicole Lynn Lewis is founder and chief executive officer of Generation Hope, a nonprofit organization that engages education and policy partners to drive systemic change and provides direct support to teen parents in college as well as their children through holistic two-generation programming to ensure all student parents have the opportunities to succeed and experience economic mobility. A former teen mother who put herself through the College of William and Mary with her 3-month-old daughter in tow, Nicole now works every day to change the statistic that less than 2% of teen mothers will earn their degrees before age 30. Generation Hope rallies around teen parents to help them earn college degrees and forge a path to economic opportunity, and is now expanding its work nationally to help colleges and universities and policymakers across the country better meet the needs of nearly 4 million parenting students who are working towards their degrees. Nicole is also a nationally known author and speaker with her critically acclaimed book, Pregnant Girl, released by Beacon Press in the spring of 2021, which was named one of NPR's best books of 2021. Thank you all for speaking today on today's panel. Let's dive in. Everybody ready? All right. Here's the first question. One of the unique things about this panel is that you've all written books that draw on your experiences and expertise as student parents. Can you begin by introducing us a little more personally to your book? What inspired you to write it and what motivated you to see it through to the end? Let's start with you, Nicole.
Thank you. First off, so excited to be here. I'm just thrilled to be in conversation with you all. My book journey started about 13 years ago, actually. I was newly graduated from college and in the workforce, and you get to know your colleagues, at your job. And I would tell people a little bit about my journey of being a young mom in college, and folks would say to me, like, wait a minute, that's not a story that you hear. That's not something that people really talk about, and you should share it. And I had always been a writer ever since I was a little girl. I had loved writing, and I thought, okay, let me try to, put this on paper and try to see if I can put a book out there about my experience, and put a proposal together and talk to a few literary agents and publishers. And the resounding response that I got was that was no. And it was that, first of all, you don't have a platform, nobody knows who you are. And then 2, no one wants to hear about teen moms being successful. That's not going to sell. It's not interesting. It's not something that we want to invest in. And so I shelved the project, and in the meantime started a nonprofit organization, and so kept myself busy. And in 2018, I was at a training on how to scale a nonprofit organization. And obviously there's the scaling of brick and mortar in different cities and, building a new generation hope somewhere, but there's also scaling in the sense of inspiring other people to do the work. And one of the vehicles for that is a book. And I thought, wow, I have this book, it's been collecting dust. And let me revisit that and see if it's something that, could be a tool in our toolkit at Generation Hope and in the larger student parent movement to inspire more people to really rally around teen parents and student parents and make sure that they're successful. And this time around, I was very fortunate to find a literary agent who believed in me and in my book and the project, and then was able to find a really wonderful home at Beacon Press, which is a social justice publisher. And really, the 2 things for me why I wanted to write the book. One was I wanted to honor the journeys of anyone who has been touched by teen pregnancy in any way, whether it's you yourself was a teen mom, or you were the child of a teen parent, knew a friend, a sister, a cousin. We don't have enough of our stories out there. So many of us have been silenced, and our stories are highly stigmatized. And then the other was I wanted people to really understand the complexities of teen pregnancy and of student parenting, right? Most people think they understand. It's a very black and white issue, but in reality, it's far more complex. And that's what I really try to get to in the book.
Thank you. Autumn?
Yeah, so my book, interestingly, is also a long time in the making and coming. So I started doing research on low-income moms trying to go to school in different capacities, starting actually back in 2004. At the time, I was a master's student and was working with the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy at UMass Boston, where we were learning about the ways in which caseworkers were actually shutting mothers out of college, even after some new regulatory changes had gone it through. And that work really inspired me and made me think that, this was something I wanted to do some more research on. And so my background is as a sociologist. And this book is actually the product of the research that was my dissertation for my doctoral program. So I was in the field doing this work starting in 2009 and conducted interviews. I conducted interviews with 31 low-income mothers who were at various phases in the process of trying to complete college. In my research, everyone had already been enrolled in college for within the past year, at least, for one class, recognizing that sometimes when you are a student parent, you may end up needing to finish college one class at a time. And so I started hearing these stories from the moms that I was interviewing. And one of the things that was just so salient to me was that so many of them told me, you have to tell this story. This story has to be out there in the world. And that in many ways, I felt like they were entrusting me as the spokesperson to tell their story. And that by accepting their stories, I was making a promise that I would share those stories with the world. And use that to try and advocate for better college access for student parents. And so, even as it's been, a long time through kind of the editing and rewriting process, turning this from a dissertation into a book manuscript, that promise has always kind of been there in the back of my mind. And I think has inspired me to do a lot of the work that I've done in terms of advocating for student parents since then, which is also something that I've incorporated into the development of this manuscript. So it's not just about, my process of doing interviews and collecting research journals. And my co-author also worked with low-income moms who were living in public housing and trying to get up and out of poverty. So we decided that it just made so much sense that our data was so complementary that we put together a proposal to the Russell Sage Foundation for a manuscript development grant. And so we got a little bit postponed again because of COVID and lots of other kinds of family things that come up, especially when you, sometimes people don't realize that when you're a student parent, when you graduate, you still have a lot of complexities in your life to manage and navigate. So I'm really excited to be going through the final processes of getting this book published now, because I really feel that same promise that it feels like it's finally coming true, to be able to really share what those stories meant to me and how they've inspired the work that I do.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's such important work. Diana, what's the story behind your book?
Hi, again, echoing what Nicole said, thank you so much for having us. Mine also started, actually, it'll be 10 years in August of 2023. It was actually August 1st of 2013 that I started the blog College Success for Moms. So my book started as a blog, and I was inspired after meeting another author, Isa Adney, who wrote Community College Success. And she urged me, please write something, because there's so many students I can't help, not being a mother or a parenting student. So the idea of a book seemed a bit ominous in the beginning of my college education. So I started blogging regularly and then inviting other moms to share their stories. Then when I transferred to the university and needed to choose an honors project, I decided, hey, there's nothing I care more about than helping other moms. The reason I started in the first place was when I went to the local bookstore, there was no book for moms in college. And as Nicole was talking, I thought about how people said there's no audience, but there was. We've been waiting. And so I said, I have to write this. I can't be the only mom that needs to know they're not alone and needs some help. So as a junior, I started drafting and presented my first full draft of my final semester, 20 weeks pregnant, with my fourth child. And then my first year of grad school, I published my book. It took a lot. I really wasn't ready to publish it earlier than that. Being able to have that experience as a pregnant student really made a difference. So I did a lot of changing after I graduated and really wanted it to be not just about me, but a help book. So what I did was I have very specific calls to action. Every chapter is a call to action where I give advice, and then I provide times where that advice was helpful for me within the story. And that's how it started.
That's great. It's fabulous. And one of the things that's really exciting for our audience is that each of your three books is so different. It contributes something different, to this field that, as you rightly said, Diana, you showed up, the books weren't there. And because of all of you, the books are now there. Nicole, I want to turn back to you and your book, Pregnant Girl. Obviously, it's a memoir that tells your personal story. What's it been like for you to share your story so publicly with the world? And how have people responded beyond just the publishers, but like the audience?
Yeah, that's like one of the number one questions that I get. And
Really?
It's really interesting. When I first set out to write Pregnant Girl, even way back, I wanted to do a sugar-coated version of the book because I was like, I don't necessarily want to, share everything, or even, the process of writing a memoir in particular is emotionally draining. It can be really tough because you put yourself back in these tough places. I've slept in the car in a high school parking lot. I have been in a domestic violence relationship. I know that feeling of I can't afford dinner tonight, for my child and I. And so that was scary to think about. I have to not only tell those, stories, those experiences, but I have to really put myself back in that place in order to tell them in an authentic way. And so originally it was more of like, let me just try to sugarcoat or skate through that. But then I realized that in order for this book to do what it needed to do in the world, I was going to have to be very vulnerable and transparent and honest about what I had been through. Because I think that the vulnerability and the honesty in the book is what connects people. It's what makes people feel like they identify with the story. There are so many people who have read the book who have never been a teen parent, have never been a parenting college student, but there are some universal themes in the book that they're like, oh my gosh, that was my family when I was growing up. Or I felt the exact same way as a kid. Or I was in this horrible, tumultuous relationship and I made, decisions that I probably wouldn't have made had I not been in that relationship. And so I think, as tough as it has been to be that honest, I don't regret it at all, because I know that the book has connected with people. It's brought people in. It's made people think differently about teen pregnancy and parenting students and who the average college student is in America. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring people in. I want people to care so that more people can join the movement that we're all trying to push forward.
That's so important because people need to be able to see themselves and their loved ones in literature, and people who have no knowledge of an experience need to be able to learn about it through literature. So your book, really enabled that. And I find all the themes that you raised really relatable. Diana, now I want to ask you a little bit more about your book. Obviously, your personal experiences as a student mother also shaped and informed the content of your guidebook and College Success for Moms. And you said a little bit about how even you amended your own book before publishing it based on the evolution of your own experiences. So can you say a little bit more about how your own experiences inform the content of your book?
Yes. I wrote the first draft and it was very generalized and very flat. I was afraid to give too much or to share things that I thought might be too heavy or not significant. And so it took me time to really work through the internal problems that I was dealing with when it came to being willing to share and be vulnerable on paper that would be published and available to anybody anywhere. But through those struggles for myself, and then also witnessing oppression of classmates that also were parenting students, I realized there are people who don't know that they're not the only parenting student. And if I just put a very flat, generalized step one, do this, it's really not going to speak to them unless I'm open and honest and willing to really dive into how I felt. And I start the book talking about how I felt like nobody and go from there. So really my personal experience as I evolved through college, it changed. And even on the blog, my blogs changed because I became more confident and I became more willing to speak out and try to reach people that needed to be reached, even if I didn't know them. But that's also the reason that in my book, I have a chapter of other stories, because I felt like my story was significant, but it wasn't the only type of story. So in the book, I shared stories from a variety of women ranging in age, ethnicity, marital status, and even socioeconomic status, because I really wanted anybody who picked it up to find even one part of that book useful, so that they just kept going one more day, one more week, one more semester, just based on my own struggle to get from freshman in college to graduating.
Yeah, that's great. The issues that you raise of invisibility and confidence are so important. And what your book now enables is for so many other people to literally see parenting students in their midst, people that they may have overlooked or not understood before. Now, your book is creating a whole new group of people that can see and, accompany people who are having that experience. And I do agree that the diversity of experiences that you represent is really one of the strengths of the book. Autumn, your forthcoming book is a bit different from the other panelists because it shares the stories of student parents from your research. In writing the book, though, how did you approach finding the balance between drawing on your own experiences as a student parent and highlighting the voices of others?
I think it really began with the process of researching the book, even before writing it, and thinking about how to disclose my own identity and experience in the process of those interviews, the outreach, the recruitment process, even from the beginning. At one point, my IRB actually pushed back on me and said, "You're oversharing too much information in your informed consent form." I said, "No, I need to share this information. I need people to know that I'm a parenting student." And because in so many ways, it gave me access to people who saw this as an opportunity to really amplify their voices, and saw me as somebody that they could trust because they knew that I had been there. At the same time, I, as a participatory action researcher, have always been very cognizant of what, knowing that student parents are a diverse group, even as a fellow student parent, I may have had a different experience or have a different perspective on something than somebody that I was interviewing or collecting research journals from. And so I actually was very cognizant of the concept in sociology called over rapport, which means that it's a form of bias in which when your personal lived experience is so similar to what you are studying, it can, you can just kind of be a little bit more selective, unconsciously in terms of, okay, I heard what you said because that resonates with me, versus, wow, you just said something that completely is outside of every kind of personal perspective or experience that I have had. And making sure that to really pay attention to those moments and elevate them, to write research memos about them, to really grapple with that, and then also to take those moments back. And I did something called interpretive focus groups, where you actually take your research to another group of parenting students, in my case, and flush out with them. Here's what I heard, here's what I'm learning from the process of doing this analysis of this research, and asking if my interpretation sounds correct, or where I might have missed something, where there might be something a little bit more complicated that might fall outside of my perspective. I've interviewed a number of students from immigrant backgrounds, from diverse walks of life. Another thing I didn't mention about my book before is that it's one of the only qualitative research studies that looks at these experiences across states and across multiple campuses. So often social science research on student parents looks at the experiences of parenting students on one or two college campuses. I'm actually not sure if any of my research participants attended the same college at all. So I had 10 different states of parents represented, really from all diverse backgrounds and identities, and really trying to, as much as I could, listen deeply and intently to what they had to say. And so in writing the book, I certainly try to be as forthcoming as possible, that Amanda and I are both former student parent alums, and how that experience shaped kind of this whole process as we've gone through the process of data collection and analysis and ultimately writing up this manuscript. But that when I'm sharing the stories, I really want to be a megaphone versus, the recognizing and reminding myself continuously, this is not a memoir, and this is not the place for me to be sharing so much of my story. So there were a few places, for example, when we're talking about childcare, Amanda and I both couldn't get into our campus childcare at Boston College because of the students have the lowest priority in admissions. And we do mention, a few things like that. But for the most part, trying to actually let our own experiences take a back seat a little bit and instead try and amplify the voices and reflections of the people who contributed to this research, which has definitely been a little bit different and an interesting process to navigate.
Thank you. I think that those methodological points that you make are actually really important, because obviously to do this work, you do have to have a means by which to establish some rapport, but then you then have, as you pointed out, have to be extra careful about not over-identifying and failing to see the diversity in the parenting student group that you're studying. So that's actually a really good lead into the next question, because parenting students are one of the most diverse student bodies in higher education. And we know that the experiences of student parents are shaped by our intersectional identities, things like race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, immigration status, and so many other things. So how do you all think that your own intersectional identities and experiences, whether of privilege or of systemic disadvantage helped or hindered your personal efforts to get through college? What privileges do you think helped support your success? And how did your experiences with discrimination, bias, or disadvantage make it harder for you to get through college? Autumn, how would you answer that question?
Well, I've thought a lot about this because in a lot of my kind of identity now, it is very easy to just kind of see the privilege and not necessarily think about the different intersectional ways that privilege and bias or discrimination is created. So just, to share, since I haven't had a chance to share yet, I was 17 years old when I got pregnant. And I was definitely in a very strange kind of situation in which I never fit within the boxes correctly. So by the time I was 17, I had already finished my GED and started community college, because when I finished my GED, it came with a gift certificate to take 2 classes at the community college inside the envelope. And so I didn't want to waste it. So I decided to go ahead and start community college and take a few classes and see what it was like. And it was that first year in community college that I got pregnant. I was actually already married when I got pregnant, even though I was 16 when I got pregnant. So that in some ways, people have seen that as a privilege. In many ways, my husband, or ex-husband now, has multiple disabilities and has struggled with addiction his entire life. And so in many ways, even though it was perceived as a privilege, it was also a challenge. Certainly being a young parent, being a person who received public assistance, in many ways, I've been kind of perceived, or people assume that I am a single mother. And at the same time, because that's, how things are perceived. And in some ways, I have experienced a lot of the kind of challenges of being a single mother, given the situation with my ex-husband, but at the same time, was not a single mother, and kind of walking that line has been really, really interesting. I think that I'm not a first generation college student, and I'm white, and I think that also gave me a sense of advantage and privilege that a lot of other people don't have. I'm a native English speaker. So there are, many ways that I think that when I walk into a Department of Transitional Assistance, is what we call it in Massachusetts, but the Public Assistance Program office, that, okay, well, this is a person who, maybe is going to actually make it, even though I've been told my whole life that I was not going to make it, and that I was just going to drop out of school, because, as Nicole said earlier, only 2% of teen parents complete a degree before age 30. And here I was, 21 years old, getting ready to finish my bachelor's degree. So, but at the same time, I think, people were willing to give me a shot and make exceptions, bend the rules for me in ways that I have seen people all out refuse to do for students who I've worked with, people that I've advocated with. And often those things do fall along the lines of race and immigration status and first language and other things like that really make it very complicated to try to go to school, because people perceive you as not being able to make it. And I also think that the fact that I had parents who were student parents really also influenced and gave me a lot of privileges, because I had somebody, coming in front of me who knew that there was campus childcare, who knew about family housing on campus, who knew that these things existed. And so even though I often felt like the only student parent on my campus, I knew that there were other student parents out there in the world. And I think that that gave me a sense of privilege and advantage that a lot of other people don't have.
Thank you for that sharing. Nicole, how would you answer this question about intersectionality in your own experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one big thing, a theme that runs throughout Pregnant Girl, even from the very first page, is the connection of between race and teen pregnancy and student parents. And it's something that I definitely reflect on in the book, and just how much being a Black mother, trying to navigate higher ed, and a young Black mother impacted my situation. And so I definitely had some privileges coming into it. You know, both my parents were college educated. I had grown up in a middle-class home. My parents, it was a two-parent home. My parents raised my sister and I from a very young age to know that college was the next step after high school. That was never in doubt. Education was always stressed in our household and supported. And those were huge advantages. You know, we work at Generation Hope with hundreds of teen moms and dads, walking alongside them in their college journeys. And what is clear is how much those advantages benefited me coming into the higher ed system. And there are so many young parents and student parents who don't have those advantages. And so those were privileges that absolutely helped me when it came to navigating college. On the flip side, I was, you know, going to a predominantly white institution. William & Mary is one of the very first colleges in the country. When we think about the early colonial colleges that really baked in the DNA of the higher ed system that we know today, William & Mary is right up there alongside, you know, all of the other ones. And you know, in the early days of the college, you could bring an enslaved person with you to college to, you know, do your chores while you were off at class. William & Mary had revenue coming in to fund the college from a plantation, a tobacco plantation. So, you know, by the time I got there wasn't a lot of advances in terms of you know, more Black students actually going to William & Mary. I was one of very few Black students at the college. Most of the people who looked like me were working in facilities or behind the counter in the cafeterias. And so you knew as a Black student walking along that campus that it was not an environment that was really designed with you in mind, that you were acutely aware of the fact that slavery was connected to this institution, as so many higher ed institutions across the country. You knew that there were students in your classes who felt like you didn't belong there. You didn't earn your seat. You were there because of some quota that the school needed to meet. I met my husband when I was at William & Mary, and he played for the football team and was constantly you know, questioned around his, you know, whether he deserved to be there. Was he just there for playing football? And so I think what's really important is understanding that if you want to do student parent work, you have to name race in this issue and in this work. It cannot be separate. And I think the same thing for teen pregnancy. We talk about abstinence, we talk about comprehensive sex education, we talk about bias in our healthcare system, but we don't really talk about race. And in order for us to really get to the root causes of why less than 2% of teen moms are graduating from college, and why you know, student parents are 10 times less likely to get a bachelor's degree within 5 years, we have to talk about race as being a huge part of that equation. And so I think for me, one thing that I really wanted people to understand was that while I did have some significant advantages coming into my experience as a student parent, my being a Black young mother came with some serious disadvantages that unfortunately are the reality for, you know, so many student parents across the country. And we have to link those two things together.
Those are some very important points. Diana, what about you? How would you answer this question?
So on the side of disadvantages, there's two that comes to mind. The first one is being first generation and below the poverty line pretty much the entire time I was in college. I grew up without a father. My mother has an intellectual disability, and my grandmother worked her life away. So I was really not prepared to be a college student. And that's the story of so many students, even without kids. So it took me a long time to even consider the idea of college. I did go to college very, very briefly, I think maybe 2 weeks when I was 21, and I got pregnant. So for about 6 years, I was a single mom working retail and office jobs, just feeling like I didn't have the option anymore to go to college because I was a mother. And it wasn't until I met my husband, David, in 2005 that college came back into the equation. He also was first gen, and he had a really not great education growing up. That's a completely different panel. But he encouraged me to go. And the whole time that I was there, he was working 2 retail jobs at all times. And if he wasn't, I was working 1 and he was working 1. And that really made things difficult. I remember at one point I had to decide if I was going to buy my textbooks or afford the gas to get to school. Living in California, if you're not going to the community college closest to you, you're going to be on the road. So that I remember that struggle. And it got worse when I transferred and had to drive a little further. The other would be mental illness. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder at 21, but it really wasn't until my later 20s when I started college that I really experienced more episodes, specifically after the birth of my second child, my daughter. That was a really not good situation. I stopped going to college. I stopped everything is the best way to put that. And then I didn't experience that again until grad school. When I tried to go back to grad school, the semester started the day I had my cesarean. And fortunately, the faculty were supportive, but the campus at that time was not family friendly. So there was no place for me to pump after 4 p.m. There was no lactation rooms available. And the one they had for faculty was across campus. There were no changing tables, so that if I wanted to come check out books or study on the weekend with my little one in tow, that I could bring her and not have to change her on the bathroom floor. And that just got to me. And fortunately, from the last experience, I learned to advocate for myself. So that's where things really changed for me when it came to mental health and learning to recognize the signs. But for a long time, that really slowed me down. On the other side, number one, being white is an advantage. So many people think if you say that, you're ignoring the things you've gone through, but it's just a truth that a Black mother on the same path as me is going to have so many more barriers than me. And I've seen it play out in peers and colleagues. So I know that being white gave me advantages that didn't just start in college, but that started long before that. The other one would be that I'm married and to a wonderful husband who's been supportive and encouraging of my college experience. Even when I have ideas about doctorates, he's still, behind me. And like I said, he worked 2 jobs and took care of the kids when I was at school. And that really made a difference. I can't imagine that if I would have continued school when I got pregnant with my first child, I can't imagine how much more the struggle would have been as a single mother than it was later on, a little bit older, but with my husband helping me out. So truly, both of those have given me an opportunity. The second half has given me an opportunity to use my voice and also make space for people to use their voices. And the first half is where I found most of my friends. That intersectional socioeconomic status geez, it taught me a lot. That's where I learned a lot about racism and the progress that wasn't being made for mothers who weren't white that were attending college, was just meeting all those moms and learning about the things that I could never imagine happening in my class as a student, happening to them in their classes. So yeah, that's.
Well, I have to admit that all of your stories are really tugging at my heartstrings and reminding me of my own experiences, because even though I'm probably a generation older than all of you, I can relate to some of these stories about intersectionality. You know, I can say, for example, that in my generation, there was a really strong stereotype of Black women being single mothers. And, you know, that was always a backdrop. And even though I went to an HBCU, you know, that meant that that institution was really attempting to counter that stereotype with the politics of respectability, which meant I was doubly stigmatized in that institution as well. And I had to take a semester off during the time that I was pregnant when I had the baby. And it was only fortunate that my grandmother lived in the same neighborhood as my college and was able to do my childcare until I completed college. So, you know, I can relate to, you know, both the, you know, the kind of stigmatized and, you know, disadvantaged aspects, but also some of the privilege, because I wasn't a first generation college student and I knew I would go beyond college to go to graduate school. I was lucky to have a very supportive dean at my school who actually wrote an application for a graduate fellowship for me and didn't even tell me. And then I ended up getting it, which enabled me to go to grad school. And that was the, you know, right after I'd had a baby. So, you know, it was some of those kind of things of people understanding, being able to see me and support me in my struggle. And I sometimes look back to that person. I probably wouldn't have a PhD today if she hadn't been looking out for me from the sidelines. But that meant, you know, that I was very committed to helping others who came after me, because when I was in graduate school, I was not in a family friendly environment. I went to a Big Ten school, I'll just say that. And, you know, I can remember after my daughter was born, in my first semester of graduate school, I came back to school in less than a week after having a baby. And I can remember, you know, having to make a presentation and like trying to make my milk not flow in the middle of my presentation. You know, I mean, there just was not a kind of support of what I was going through at all. So it's good that we're doing this work so that others who come behind us have a different experience. So now I want to speak to something that we haven't talked about yet, and that is that the experiences of student moms and student dads can be very different. And the college experience can also be very different, as we've somewhat alluded, for single parents compared to those who have partners. So how do you think that gender and relationship status impact the student parent experience? Diana, why don't I start with you this time?
So I already touched upon, you know, the advantages of being married, but the one thing I will say is one of the very first times I shared a blog, one of my first comments was from a man who said, "What about college success for dads?" And my response was, "You should write that. I'm not a dad." But beyond that, there's a big difference between the two. It's not that a father attending college isn't going to struggle. It's that a mother tends to have more guilt about focusing on themselves through college. And also a mother, you know, you can get pregnant and then have to try to get through those barriers. And that goes from during pregnancy complications, which thankfully we have Title IX, but that doesn't necessarily cover everything that may happen. And then through postpartum and having to delay school potentially because of that, and being somewhere where it's not a family-friendly campus with lactation support and flexible schedules with classes that will work for you, or online options as well. And it is that part, the idea that it's okay to tell somebody, "We'll come back next year." This is something that has been on my mind. Not everybody can wait till next year. And a lot of people don't realize that, you know, getting through college was a personal goal to improve myself, but it was also to improve my employability. And I desperately wanted to get out of poverty. So waiting a year, because, you know, at the grad program, it wasn't a semester option. You started that year, you waited till the next. that wasn't an option for me. And that's why I ended up, starting school the day I had a C-section, and returning. I was very fortunate to return a month in, working from home. But again, like I said, there was no place for me to pump. The seats themselves were not prepared for an overweight woman who had a C-section. So being comfortable in class, worrying about my milk coming in, and then also just missing my daughter desperately, were all things that, as far as I know, my husband has never told me he misses the kids when he goes to school, or he feels bad that he's there and not at home. And I think that for me stemmed from kind of growing up believing that my one purpose in life was to have kids. And so doing anything that wasn't directly related made me feel guilty and terrible. And I have yet to encounter that with a dad in college. I'm sure it exists, but not in my experience.
Sure. Autumn, I know you also addressed a little bit about the relationship status side, but feel free to speak to either gender or the relationship status, either from personal experience or from your research.
Well, I think that I just wanted to speak a little bit more about gender, because I think that it is really important, and that like Diana, my book is specifically about low-income moms, and I've been asked from the beginning, well, what about dads? And part of the reason why my book was specifically directed to really focus on the experience of low-income moms is because there are gender differences, and that especially, given the very high numbers of single moms, and when we're looking at issues like the feminization of poverty, for example, that those issues are directly impacting the experience of student moms. Something else that comes out in my book invokes the concept of the second shift, which comes from the research of Arlie Russell Hochschild, in which many of the moms really had developed what Hochschild would call a family myth, which is a way that one kind of internally rationalizes the fact that as the woman in a relationship with, that they would like to see as being egalitarian, they're still doing the bulk of the family labor. And that, I heard this myth again and again throughout my research, to the point that it is stressed throughout the book, that school is not work. And despite the fact that you could be enrolled in 16 credits a term, and so we know that, or just, for basic math, 15 credits is a 45-hour-a-week minimum commitment, and that's if you don't have to go through tutoring, you don't have to go through intensive labs, or have learning disabilities, or other kinds of things that are going to make it require even more time commitment. And so, many of the women said, oh, well, he works hard, referring to their partner. He works really hard. And yes, from what I saw and heard, it sounded like these partners were working in, physical, manual labor type jobs in which they were physically exerting themselves a lot. But it allowed them to kind of dismiss the fact that they were also working hard, that they were in school full time. They were carrying the bulk of caring for children with disabilities, caring for their families' public assistance benefits, which is another layer of really unacknowledged labor that's primarily performed by low-income women. I even have gone to the extent that I now call that type of labor the unspoken shift, because nobody really acknowledges that this, is a labor-intensive, technically expert, it requires a lot of technical expertise to just know how to navigate these systems. And in my case, I did have a mom who kind of helped a little bit, but there was nobody professionally available on my campuses at any of the colleges that I've attended that could help me navigate these things or give me advice. And I had to go in and read the policy manuals for every public assistance program that I ever received, just to be able to understand what my rights were and to be able to understand how this was supposed to be processed and navigated, because often my own caseworkers didn't know how to handle my situation. And so, you know, I think that that carries across the board in terms of, you know, some of the gender differences. But when I've been doing this series of focus groups and have also heard from a number of dads who have said, you know, I would like to be a full partner. And when I try to, for example, ask for time off so that I can go to my partner's prenatal appointments with her, you know, my requests are dismissed. When I ask for time off because, or, you know, let somebody know that I need to go pick up my kid sick from daycare, people say, well, can't your wife do that? And so I hear and I resonate with the experiences that I'm hearing from dads as well. And I think that just because my book focuses on dads doesn't mean that student dads are not an important population to pay attention to, and that we need to know about these challenges that they're facing as well. But also recognize that those challenges are intersectionally different in many cases, and really being able to take the time to take a deep dive into what some of those challenges are for student dads, I think is definitely something that more research needs to be done on that as well. And like I said, just because my book focuses on a different aspect of the student parent population doesn't mean in any way to discredit the experiences of student dads at the same time. We need research on both. And, you know, I just am hopeful that we're really starting to see more growth in research across the field and looking at student parent experiences. And I really just encourage that research to continue and, you know, try to support that research in any way that I can.
Thank you. Nicole, what are your thoughts about student dads and about relationship status as it pertains to student parenting?
Yeah, I mean, what was really important to me in Pregnant Girl is that while it's a memoir, it also is a commentary on kind of the state of things, right? And in both teen pregnancy and college and economic mobility. And what was important to me was to make sure that my story was not meant to be the representative story of every person who's been impacted by teen pregnancy or every student parent. And what I wanted to make sure I was able to bring into the book was the role of fathers, the importance of supporting fathers in their educational pursuits. And so I brought in the stories of two of the fathers that we have in our program at Generation Hope, who were really just generous and wonderful in talking about the challenges that they faced. And I think what's really important that both Diana and Autumn raise is that there are different experiences. There are certainly some commonalities, but there are different experiences that are really important and need to be elevated. I mean, there's enough research need to go around. There's enough, you know, dearth of stories, dearth of attention, dearth of investment and support to go around. We need to hear the perspective of mothers, and we need to hear the perspective of fathers. I think it's really important to point out that when we're talking about the student parent population, single fathers, Black and Latinx and Hispanic single fathers have the highest dropout rates than any other student parent group. And so that is telling you something, right? Like there are some differences, and certainly so much falls on mothers. And I was a single mom myself in college. But there is something happening across higher ed where we are losing males, period. You know, when we look at enrollment, we're losing males, we're losing Black males in particular. And single fathers, Black and Latinx or Hispanic single fathers we're really losing them. And so I think it speaks to the need for more research, for more action, for more investments in the entire student parent kind of realm, but particularly around fathers. And so I'm hoping, as Autumn said, that we will be able to do that. And what I want us to do is, when we talk about student parents, not to make the assumption that that just is code for moms, right? And I think wherever we can call out, hey, we're also talking about fathers here, bringing them into the panels, bringing them into the policy discussions, making sure that they are talking to higher ed administrators about their particular needs, and making sure it's an inclusive conversation. That's on us, you know, to do that. And so I feel really passionately about that too.
Great, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. So based on where we are on time, I'll just note that we are starting to get some questions from the audience. So I'm just going to give one more question directly to Autumn before I transition over to the questions from the audience. And if we have time after that, I may have a few more questions for you myself, but I want to make sure we have time for the good questions we're getting in. Autumn, you've recently been considering the terminology and labels that are used to discuss student parents, such as student caregiver, student mom, parenting student, et cetera. So can you elaborate on why these labels matter and the importance of acknowledging the different ways that parenting students describe themselves?
Yeah, so I just, the first thing I just want to make a reference to is that I just shared on the WCW Women Change World's blog a little bit more of my thinking about this issue, and so you know, wanted to make sure that people know to check that out and go ahead and read it. But so I've been involved in this work, like I said, since 2004, and obviously before that I was a student parent. So it's been really interesting to watch the way that the language has evolved. And so, you know, it used to be, when I first started doing this work, that we were specifically talking about low-income moms. And it wasn't until about 2009 or 2010 when a group of advocates sat down and had a conversation around a big table after a conference to kind of talk more about, you know, how do we talk about this population, and, you know, what's the right terminology that we should be using? And that was the first time that I had ever heard anybody use the term student parents. And student parent has always been a term that really resonated for me. But at the same time, really started thinking about, you know, there are so many different terminologies. And one of my favorite is actually parent scholars, which is used by Generation Hope and Nicole's team. Recognizing that not only, you know, are you a parent, but you're also a scholar. But the terminology parenting student has been much more commonly used and aligns with the terminology of Title IX, which I know Diana mentioned earlier on the panel. So Title IX specifically includes some protections for, quote, pregnant and parenting students as a group. But I also think the term parenting students is really interesting because it acknowledges all students who are doing the act of parenting. It doesn't require that you are yourself a parent. You could be a step parent. You could be a sibling caregiver who is parenting, and really thinking about that actively. You know, parenting as an act versus as an identity, although certainly it's both. But to me, it's in many ways about being as inclusive as possible, aligning, you know, the language with the language of Title IX, and also recognizing that by putting parent before student in one's identity, that we're acknowledging that one's children come first in this equation. That when, you know, it comes down between, you know, if I have to choose between going to class and leaving my child in an unsafe situation, or leaving my child home sick alone, I'm choosing my child every time. And that's how most parenting students feel. And so I, you know, at the same time, I think that I started having some conversations with other parenting students about this, and realized that people have different labels that they prefer. Some people said, I don't really like being called a parenting student. I'm a student parent, or, have a different kind of identity. I'm a student mom. That's what resonates for me. And so I've really started trying to use these terms interchangeably, in part because I want to acknowledge that that people, resonate with different terms and different identities, and that to me, using diverse terms is a way of acknowledging the diversity of identities. The other thing I just wanted to really quickly mention is that sometimes when we're looking at this population, that we're actually looking at very specific subsets of this population. And so finding the language to very, very concretely specify who exactly what we're talking about. So for example, when I'm looking at the national data statistics, we're talking, and when they refer to single parents, we're talking about unmarried parents. And there are, a number of single parents who might be separated or, otherwise kind of not fit into that category. So I think that by trying to use as specific of terminology as possible when we're talking about a specific subset of parenting students is also just really critical in terms of being really clear about who we're talking about, and making sure to acknowledge and respect that there may be other people who don't necessarily fit into that group without discrediting their claim to identity as part of that group. So like I said, unmarried mothers versus single mothers means something slightly different. And so that's where I started really thinking about the terminology.
Yeah, those are some great points. And it's even making me think about the effect of the pandemic. I had a focus group with some students for another purpose recently, and a number of them talked about their experiences of having to parent siblings at home or relatives' kids because they were not at school, but were at home because of the pandemic. And that changed their experience of being students, even though they were not themselves parents. All right, so I want to turn to our audience questions, and noting that we only have 5 to 7 minutes left, I'd like to ask our panelists to keep their answers brief. The first question is directed to you, Diana. This person says, I'm a student parent alumni from Mount SAC as well. So exciting to see your success. How do you educate faculty and staff to understand the student parent experience?
First, I'm so excited to have a fellow Mountie. That makes my day. Let's make sure to connect. When it comes to this is something I did not think about until last year during a workshop, when an advisor that joined the workshop asked, what can students do to kind of make their instructors understand? And that's the moment I realized parenting students should not have to continually climb over those barriers. Faculty, staff, and administration need to work to remove those barriers. So I am writing a book for that audience because I started realizing, like, wow, we're putting a lot of pressure on parenting students to do a lot that they shouldn't have to do. What I would say in the, things that can be done instantly, knowing the rights of parenting students under Title IX, but also getting to know your students on a one-on-one basis, including assignments in your coursework that allows you the opportunity to get to know bits and pieces they're willing to share with you. And one of those I saw not too long ago was a flexible learning statement, where I share that I believe in inclusive, flexible, equitable learning, and that I shared my philosophy. I shared my willingness to negotiate due dates. I provide weekly check-ins that have nothing to do with assignments, and then allowing them audio and video recording options if they'd like during online discussions and stuff like that. And then also just raising funds and increasing funds for on-campus care, because from my experience, there's almost always a wait list, and or there's not enough funds for students. So those are some of the immediate things. But I believe, Layla, you mentioned the pandemic, and I truly believe the pandemic has proved to us that we can make things work. So we need to to really stick to being creative and being just strong advocates for making change instead of making our students climb over barrier after barrier.
Thank you. And, you know, that's a great point. And I hope that there are some faculty and students faculty and staff watching right now and really taking all this to heart. All right. So the second question says, I'm looking to pursue this as part of or all of my dissertation work due to my own experience taking care of my toddler son during his cancer treatments during my PhD program. Have any of you had experiences with higher ed students who are caretakers of medically complex children? So anybody can speak to that, just jump in.
That because I had a number of people in my dissertation who had children with a lot of different medical complexities, and a lot of often ADD, autism spectrum disorders, but also some kids that had, one of my dissertation participants had a child with Landau-Kleffner syndrome. So, you know, when you think about that kind of extra work that I talked about earlier, that it's even more complicated, you know, when you're navigating, trying to take care of a child that has medical complexities. One of the participants in my research, Rosemary, had a son who had to go to the hospital at least once a week for treatment, but she lived in a rural area 2 hours from the nearest children's hospital. And so one day she got a speeding ticket and couldn't afford to pay when she was late to take her son to the hospital. And it ended up spiraling out of control because she couldn't afford to pay that speeding ticket. Her license got suspended. Her car got impounded because she was driving without a license. But, you know, from what she shared with me, you know, it's like, I have to take my son to the hospital. How else am I going to get him to the hospital every week if I can't drive? Another mom, you know, in Ohio, Molly, had a son who could only eat certain types of foods, given his medical situation, but she couldn't afford most of those foods. And so just finding out, you know, where she could find, you know, gluten and soy and dairy-free items that a 6-year-old would eat was another really complicated additional layer of things. And so, you know, I just really applaud anyone who is going through caring for a child with medically complex needs while trying to also go to school and fully understand if that means that you can't take on a full-time course load because of the other obligations that are part of your life world.
Okay, great. I've got 2 more questions in 1 minute, so I'm going to read the question, but I'm going to ask y'all to be quick. This one says, I am a returning student parent at Georgia State University and have started the first student parent organization called Parenting Panthers. And I have to say that's near and dear to my heart because I came to Wellesley from Georgia State. Can you tell me how you would have benefited from such an organization and what areas of focus you think I can make the most impact? Just for fun, I'm in my 50s now and parenting my second set of kids. The title of my memoir would most likely be Midterms and Menopause. All right, so who wants to take that one? Anybody got ideas about how such an organization would have benefited you during your time? Maybe someone, Nicole, I don't know, we haven't heard from you yet in the Q&A.
Sure, yeah, I was just gonna say, I think the big thing, and this is something we hear even with our students and student parents across the country, is connection. And I think Autumn having the benefit of seeing her parents go through school as student parents, like that's huge. And so many student parents step on a college campus and you feel like you're completely alone. There aren't opportunities for you to connect with other students who are going through the same things that you're going through. Building that village is so crucial. And that's what we do every day at Generation Hope with our students. But it's not happening on college campuses. So I think finding ways to connect student parents across the institution is huge. And that can happen in person, it can happen virtually, and it needs to be flexible because everybody has different situations. And I think whether you have little ones or children that have medical issues, or you have a different work schedule, I mean, there's just so much. So I think connection and flexibility are going to be key. And sometimes connecting just to enjoy pizza, or just to talk about, like, you know, hey, we're both trying to potty train these kids and we can't figure it out. Like, it doesn't always have to be a really heavy like workshop or something like that, but just times to connect and kick back and to just be yourselves, I think is really huge.
Thank you. All right, so this is the last audience question. It's technically a yes or no question, but I'm going to ask each of you to give a one-sentence answer. It's clear how incredibly challenging it is to be a parenting student. That said, I would think that your children are a major motivator for struggling through school because you want to create the best life possible for your children. Do you agree?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Yes, 100%. I started college for my kids, and now I see my kids wanting to go to college, and that inspires me. And the main thing for me is it is changing. It's a generational change. So being able to look one generation out and see better financial stability and all of that, absolutely, my kids inspire me and motivate me.
Thank you. Who's next?
I
Jump
can
in.
go next. I'll just say, yes, 100%. My daughter was my motivating factor. The days can be really tough and long and hard, but you know, you want a better life for your little one. And I will just say, parenting college students have higher GPAs on average than non-parenting college students. And I think, you know, your children are a big reason for that.
Autumn?
Yes, absolutely. My children always inspired me. They were there cheerleading along with me the entire time, from every graduation ceremony there, they were in the audience cheering for me. And that's what it really was all about. It was,
Yeah.
I did this for them.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I can say the same, and I'm so proud of my son who just got his master's in social work and is helping families and kids all over the place, in part because I'm sure of how we grew up together. All right, so that being said, I want to thank the three of you, Diana, Nicole, and Autumn, for joining in this conversation today. I also want to thank everyone in the audience for attending our program this afternoon. As I mentioned at the beginning, a recording of this program will be posted on our website within the next week, and we'll email a link to the recording to everyone who registered to the program. So thank you and goodbye.